The Silent Shield Prologue. The encounter, the small town of Ashwood, nestled deep in the heart of rural Georgia, stood as a relic of the past. Its antique diners, rusted train tracks, and sprawling fields painted a picture of simplicity. But beneath its quiet charm ran deep veins of division. It was a town where whispers carried weight. Traditions were upheld to a fault, and outsiders were met with suspicion. On a crisp autumn evening, under the dim glow of flickering streetlights, a black woman named Vanessa Carter drove her SUV into town. With her 5-year-old son, Elijah, strapped into the back seat, she navigated the unfamiliar streets, her heart heavy with a mixture of determination and trepidation. She had come to Ashwood for a reason, a deeply personal mission, but she hadn't expected her journey to take such a dangerous turn. Chapter 1. The wrong side of town. Vanessa had lived a life riddled with challenges, but she carried herself with quiet strength. A single mother and a former Marine, she had faced adversity with resilience. Her mission in Ashwood was simple: to honor her late father, a decorated veteran who had grown up in the town, but had fled its suffocating racism decades ago. She planned to visit the house where he had been born, leave flowers on the porch, and say a prayer for the man who had shaped her life with his stories of courage and sacrifice. But Ashwood wasn't welcoming as Vanessa stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town. She felt the weight of hostile stares. A group of men leaned against the side of a rusty pickup truck, their conversations halting as they noticed her. Their eyes followed her every move, and though they said nothing, their silence was louder than words. She paid for her gas quickly and returned to her car, her instincts telling her to leave as soon as possible. She didn't know it, but the men had taken note of her license plate. Outsider. Chapter 2. The gang. The Ashwood Sons were a local gang made up of disillusioned men who clung to the town's darkest traditions. They weren't an organized militia or a criminal syndicate, but their presence was enough to intimidate anyone who didn't belong. They prided themselves on being the guardians of Ashwood, policing its streets and ensuring that outsiders understood their place. Their leader, a wiry man named Clyde, had inherited his hatred like a family heirloom. His father, a former Ku Klux Klan member, had drilled into him the notion that Ashwood was pure, and that it was his duty to keep it that way. Clyde and his followers spent their days drinking beer, trading conspiracy theories, and patrolling the town for anyone they deemed a threat. When Clyde heard about the black woman and her child at the gas station, he saw it as an affront. "She doesn't belong here," he said to his crew, slamming his beer down on the table. "Let's make sure she gets the message." Chapter 3. The confrontation. Vanessa had just reached the old Carter family house when the first truck pulled up behind her. The house was a dilapidated structure on a lonely stretch of road, its windows boarded up and its paint peeling. She parked her car and stepped out, holding Elijah's hand tightly. She placed a bouquet of flowers on the porch and knelt down, whispering a prayer. Elijah tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, who are they?" he asked, pointing to the trucks that had surrounded them. Vanessa's heart sank. A group of 6 men had emerged, their faces twisted with malice. Clyde stepped forward, a smirk on his lips. Well, what do we have here?" he drawled. "You lost." Lady Vanessa stood tall, her military training kicking in. "I'm just visiting." "I'll be on my way shortly," Clyde laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the stillness. "Visiting, huh? We don't take kindly to strangers poking around where they don't belong. Especially not your kind." Elijah clung to his mother's leg, his wide eyes filled with fear. Vanessa felt a surge of anger, but kept her composure. "We're not looking for trouble," she said firmly. "We'll leave." But Clyde wasn't interested in letting them go so easily. "Not so fast," he said, circling her like a predator. "You think you can just waltz into our town and disrespect us?" Another man stepped forward, holding a baseball bat. "Maybe we ought to teach her a lesson." Vanessa's mind raced. She had faced worse threats in combat, but this was different. She wasn't armed, and she had Elijah to protect. "Stay behind me," she whispered to her son, chapter 4. The revelation just as the situation seemed poised to escalate. The sound of sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flashed as a police cruiser pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out. One of them, a tall black man with a commanding presence, approached the group. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Clyde sneered. "Just a friendly conversation, officer. Nothing to worry about." The officer's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. He recognized Vanessa instantly. "Mom, are you all right?" he asked, his tone respectful. Vanessa nodded. "We're fine, officer," but the officer wasn't convinced. He turned to Clyde. "I suggest you and your boys get back in your trucks and leave. Now." Clyde hesitated, but the officer's authority was undeniable. Grumbling, the gang retreated to their vehicles and drove off, their taillights disappearing into the darkness. The officer turned back to Vanessa. "I apologize for their behavior. Are you sure you're okay?" Vanessa looked at him closely. "Thank you, officer." "James," he said. "James Carter." Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "Carter?" "My father was Thomas Carter." James stared at her in shock. "Thomas Carter was my uncle, chapter 5. The legacy in the hours that followed." Vanessa learned the truth about her family's history in Ashwood. Thomas Carter had been a hero not just to his daughter, but to the Black community in the town. He had stood up to injustice, fought for civil rights, and inspired others to do the same. But his courage had also made him a target, and he had been forced to leave Ashwood to protect his family. James, inspired by his uncle's legacy, had joined the police force to bring change from within. He had faced countless challenges, but had never wavered in his commitment to justice. When Clyde and his gang learned of Vanessa's identity, they were shaken. Thomas Carter's name still held power in Ashwood, and the realization that they had harassed his daughter filled them with shame, though not necessarily remorse. Epilogue. A new beginning. Vanessa's visit to Ashwood marked the beginning of a new chapter for the town. With James's help, she began working to preserve her father's legacy, sharing his story and advocating for change. It wasn't easy, and resistance remained, but slowly the town began to confront its past. For Vanessa, the journey was about more than honoring her father. It was about ensuring a better future for Elijah, a future where he could walk through any town without fear. And though the road ahead was long, she knew she wasn't walking it alone.